When people talk about J Dilla, it's usually in regard to his production. At that point, the discussion around his production usually boils down to the same topics. People love to remind you that he turned off quantization on his MPC, and it makes his drum sound off-kilter and human-like. Or maybe they'll talk about how he made donuts on his deathbed and overanalyze the underlying narrative each track has, despite it, for the most part, being a barely organized beat tape. Or they'll refer to him as the
godfather of lo-fi hip-hop.
Yeah, I'm just gonna turn this off.
And make unwarranted comparisons between him and Nujabes. Even though I'd say that's a gross oversimplification of his creativity, especially in regard to his post-90s work. At what I'd consider their creative peaks, they sounded absolutely nothing alike. That's not to put down one or the other, they're both absolutely great. Like, Dilla is one of the producers that got me into making music. But I say this as a producer of 10 years who loves Dilla to bits. For God's sake, let's please talk about something different. For example, yes, we're talking about J Dilla, but this time it's about his work as a rapper. See, J Dilla occupies the same space as Madlib when it comes to rapping. He's a producer first and rapper second. Neither of them are particularly great at rapping, but it's just something they do solidly enough. And I think there's an advantage to being a rapping producer. You have the knowledge on how to approach the beat and can just tailor it to however you want. But while Madlib had a more abstract slant with Quasimodo, both he and Dilla were generally more straightforward in their rapping. Madlib, under his old group Loot Pack and his handful of features and verses over the years, usually focus on lyrical flexing, punchlines, and reminding the listener how much he's better than you at making music, specifically dope-ass beats.
Which beat? A dope-ass beat. I know what that is.
How it feels to chew 5 gum.
J Dilla's rapping is very much a product of the late 90s to early 2000s gangster rap bling era. It's focused on a select few things, such as in the Slum Village material, the beats and rapping are a lot more jazzy and laid back, but still kind of follow the same concepts. However, when we get into Dilla's solo material past that point, his production got a lot more bouncier and started to incorporate more electronic influence. His rapping in turn became a lot more aggressive, and really started to lean more into that bling era type of style. Speaking of which, Welcome to Detroit is Dilla's solo debut. We're not at the point yet where Dilla starts going off the rails in terms of sound. If anything, this seems more like a transition between his earlier jazzy style going into a more rigid electronic-based style. A solid amount of the beats here are very bare bones. Most of the time it's just drums, bass, a pad, or a synth stab, but goddamn does he make the best of it. Him and his guests. My favorites in this style are The Clapper featuring Blue, Come Get It with Elzai, Beige and Dem Part 2, and Shake It Down. The Clapper, not to be confused with its stepson, is the most standout track for me because it has just this weird groove that is also super bouncy. The drum pattern is just kick, kick, snare, snare. But the sub bass is in that signature Dilla style where it hits in between the kicks and snares. The fact that people could flow over something like that is kinda crazy to me. Dilla's flow is kinda weird and staggered, but it works really well with this production. It's just that I'm so used to hearing the bass hits match up with the kicks. Although there is kind of an issue with all the beats being stripped down, it's because a lot of the songs end up just kind of sounding the same. If there's any advantage to having these stripped down beats, it's that Dilla and his guests stand out a lot more, especially compared to his other projects. An interesting detour on the album is the track Think Twice, which is a cover of Donald Byrd's song of the same name. Here Dilla is on vocals. It's just him singing over a jazzy Dilla-esque beat. Dwele handles half of the production here, playing the trumpet and the piano, while Dilla is presumably handling the drums. It sounds like a live band is playing the song, which stands in stark contrast with the mechanical nature of, well, the rest of the album. Now that I think about it, the sound here is less sample reliant, which goes against what I normally associate with Dilla, that being a sample flipping savant. There's also a handful of instrumental interludes that are admittedly a nice change of pace, but don't really catch my attention all that much. This very much seems like a collection of songs that were just thrown together without too much direction, other than, say, the vibes matching. Dilla had intended the album to be a billboard for other Detroit talents he respected, so that checks out. It's not exactly a personal project. Then again, I'm not really here to listen to Dilla craft a masterful concept album. This is a solid background album to bop your head to and save the good songs for rotation. Following the release of this project, Dilla started recording for what would become his second full-length album. He released Fuck the Police, unrelated to NWA's version, prior to the album's expected release. However, as recording progressed, the label became disappointed with the album and decided to shelve it, and for a long time, it stayed unreleased in the archives. So we'll get to that when it finally comes out. But now let's focus on the next actual release. Rough Draft is an EP by J Dilla that has him featuring on all the tracks as the sole rapper. The album was recorded while his second album was indefinitely delayed, and it came to be released in 2003 on a German indie label. Owing to its name, Rough Draft, in its original 2003 form, sounds like a compilation of rough drafts. The songs were roughly mixed, and the verses were relatively short. It's like the songs are missing a extra verse or feature at times. But regardless, I can't knock too many points off of the project because of that. The 2007 reissue does add one guest verse though, along with slightly better mixing. Either way, the beats on this project are still great. On Rough Draft, we've gone back to the sample-centric production. Let's Take It Back has this spacey sample that I can't fathom how he managed to flip. The original track sounds so freeform, and he managed to bring order to this version. The next track, Reckless Driving, definitely sounds like its namesake. The beat is driving and full of just palpable tension. I also got whiplash from hearing Dilla reference Ludacris. I shouldn't be so surprised as they were contemporaries at the time. Anyways, not a big fan of Nothing Like This. Dilla sings on this track and it's kinda rough. It's weird because he sounded pretty alright on the last album. You know what? Just to get it out of the way, the other track on here I genuinely dislike is Wild. I'd argue this is one of the worst J Dilla beats. I know that sounds like sacrilege, but hear me out. This was an addition that the 2007 reissue made, and it definitely sounds like an album bonus track. The rapping is fine, but it's that vocal sample in the hook with that grating ass voice. It's like a mosquito just buzzing around your ear. It's just not a pleasant listen. Like, of all the posthumous Dilla stuff you could have put out, this should have stayed in the archive. No one in the hood is bumping this. Anyways, with that negativity out of the way, I'll talk about Make 'Em Envy. This is probably one of my favorite Dilla beats, if not favorite Dilla tracks in general. The way that the beat is looped makes it sound like there's no end to it. It's so seamless that it's kinda hypnotic. The drum beat is also kinda unconventional, but Dilla manages to weave his way around it surprisingly well. The MOP sample also works well as this weird, aggressive, contrasting element to the song's mysterious vibe, even though the lyrics just say otherwise. The other songs are just not as notable in my opinion. The Money, Crushin', Take Notice with Guilty Simpson are typical rapper Dilla songs. The rest of the tracks I didn't mention are just interludes and they exist. Overall, Rough Draft is a decent release with a few great standouts, barring the one stinker the reissue has.
Yes, you're doing it! Stay with it!
Champion Sound is the sole album by hip-hop supergroup J-Lib, which consisted of J Dilla and Madlib. What initially started as throwaway beats from Dilla became a full-on collab album between the two after said beats started to circulate around the Stones Throw camp. The recording process started in 2001 but finished in 2003 due to the two artists working remotely from Detroit and California respectively. The album was also marred by leaks and heavy bootlegging, which also delayed its release. Furthermore, Dilla was dealing with the stress of his second album being delayed and eventually being shelved. So what happens when two producer legends collaborate on an album? To give some context, I say that Dilla and Madlib were both in their prime here. Dilla did two of Common's albums, and Madlib had the Quasimodo debut, Shades of Blue, and what would eventually become Mad Villainy, right under their belts. And they were both trending towards a more experimental sound going into the 2000s. So what would this album sound like? Well, the album is split in half between Dilla rapping over Madlib beats and vice versa. Overall, I think the best combo is Dilla over Madlib beats. Now, I don't know if this is a hot take with this project, but I think the weakest link is Madlib's rapping. Normally, Madlib's more mellow style fits his production, see Quasimodo or Lupac, but when put to J Dilla beats, it sounds a bit out of place at times. Neither of them are great rappers, but the gap between Dilla and Madlib's deliveries are pretty stark. Like, Dilla sounds like he's rapping his ass off, and Madlib is halfway falling asleep. Funnily enough, Madlib is also the MVP for giving amazing beats to Dilla. That's not to say Dilla's production is not bad, but they're definitely carrying the Madlib verses a lot of the time. The album opens with McNasty Filth, which has this very punchy and bombastic beat. The orchestral hits just punch you right in the gut, but like in a good way. But that's contrasted with the more mellow section with the Rhodes Key keys and what seems to be a distorted guitar droning in the background. Dilla and Frankendink's energy along with the beat really drive it forward. Another big highlight for me is the red. No, not the newer version that's on streaming services, but the original vinyl version. Apparently the sample just wasn't cleared due to Madlib's lyrics, and the original artist not approving of them. I wouldn't knock around that since, the sample was uncleared, but my god, this is probably the best beat on the album. This is also one of the few Madlib verses I don't dislike here. The beat they got to replace this one on the reissue is fine. It's not offensively bad, but the vocals were just lifted and put here without any edits to fit the new pocket or song structure. The heist is another Madlib highlight that isn't just a bragging song. They're actually telling a story over this weird sounding Dilla beat. Granted, it's very simple, but it's a nice change of pace. They're actually talking about something. The Official has a cool sample flip of a song that Dilla used in Slum Village's most famous song. Madlib here takes that mellow sample and makes it into something super hype and bouncy. Madlib also drops another grimy beat for Survival Test. That one is probably my second favorite on the album. Some other solid tracks for me are Raw Shit with Talib Kweli, The Mission, React with Madlib as Quasimodo, Shot with Guilty Simpson, and Stars. Overall, I'd say this is a solid album with great production, but half of the album's rapping is just kinda even for Dilla standards. I really want to like this album more, but the rest of the tracks I didn't mention just don't really click with me. Unfortunately, this is the last rap album that Dilla would feature on before his untimely death in 2006. I won't be covering Donuts in full because 1, it's an instrumental project, and 2, I don't think I can say anything that hasn't been said about Donuts. And honestly, Donuts deserves its own mini video dedicated to it, but so many people already beat me to the punch on that, so you won't be getting it, sorry. Just know that I think it's a great project.
Shut the fuck up.
The Shining, released half a year after Dilla's death, was the last album he had a direct hand in making as a producer and MC. The album was worked on at the same time as Donuts, both in the hospital and out of the hospital, from 2003 to 2006. However, due to The Shining's nature as Dilla's second proper album, much more time was put into The Shining over Donuts. However, Dilla died with the album being only 75% complete, with the rest of the work being added in post, namely some of the verses by guest artists and recycling some of the beats from Donuts. The album kicks off with Geek Down featuring Busta Rhymes. I'm kinda disappointed here because Busta has a cool history with Dilla but is regulated to doing the intro to the album without a proper verse. Not just here, but anywhere on the album. However, that small misstep is forgotten by the next track. E equals MC squared is the first of 4 in a series of what I like to call Dilla's best tracks ever, that just appear back to back on this album. The beat is super inventive with that vocal sample, but it also hits hard with the drums and the bouncy bass line as well. This is also the hardest I've ever heard Common rap on a track. He's almost never this aggressive, but it matches the energy of the track very well. Dilla doesn't really do much here besides being Common's hype man, but that's all he really needs to do. The next track is Love featuring Pharoah Monch. Again, another amazing beat. It has a different bouncy energy to it that Monch just weaves and rides through. It sounds dirty, but it's also like catchy and positive. It almost kind of sounds like a Kanye beat, which at the time Dilla was in direct competition with. Following that is the track Baby with Guilty Simpson and Madlib. It carries a similar energy to the last track, but it's brought down a tempo. However, in terms of lyrical structure, it's basic Dilla Madlib affair. It doesn't really match the beat, but like the vibe is there, you know? Then the vibe would be brought down even more, well, in a good way, in So Far to Go with Common making another appearance alongside the late D'Angelo. D'Angelo croons over the hook while Common is back to his usual vibe. Although Common is a little more horny, I guess, on this verse than usual. I have vivid memories playing this on the aux and forgetting the song even has that. Every time I'm like, damn it, Common is talking about his penis again. The banger streak would kinda end by the time Jungle Love comes on. MED and Guilty Simpson take vocal duties here over a minimal but hard-hitting beat. It doesn't reach the same enjoyment I got out of the 4 other songs, but it's pretty solid. Maybe because it's reminding me of
Interior Crocodile Alligator.
The next vocal track would be Dime Piece featuring Dwele. It's a pretty basic but solid R&B jam. Dwele isn't D'Angelo, but he does a good job here. Love Movin' is the next track, which features Black Thought from The Roots. I haven't listened to much of The Roots discog, but I know that Black Thought is a really good rapper, just based on a few tracks I've heard, plus this freestyle. But he's just a lot more laid back here, just glazing Dilla. Granted, it's earned. but he doesn't do it in a particularly interesting way. Like, it's a decent track, but I feel like Black Dot of all people could have gone harder here. The last track, Won't Do, ends the album on a positive note. Here's another instance of Dilla's singing appearing, and this time it's actually pretty good. The singing combined with this Isley Brothers sample and this really ambient synthy sample just sounds absolutely angelic. This is another one of Dilla's best tracks. The rest of the tracks I didn't mention before are instrumental interludes, but that doesn't mean that they're not interesting. In fact, these beats are really good, almost like they were supposed to have someone on them. Love Jones, Over the Breaks, and Body Moving are especially begging for proper verses to be put on them, but ultimately nothing was done. Overall, I think this is Dilla's peak as a solo artist, if we're not counting Donuts. In fact, this is a great companion piece to Donuts, which displayed his creativity unfiltered. The Shining is more focused and consistent throughout, and doesn't have any moments I would truly call subpar or bad. The only thing I wish could have happened is to see this 100% done with Dilla's input. And with that, we've talked about all the J Dilla Rap albums. Oh wait, I forgot about something. To give some context from when I mentioned this album earlier, this album was called Hejai during its production, which is funny because it seems like the label paid Jay a little too much because the album was way over budget. Like $450,000 over budget, and that's to upgrade all his equipment and build a new studio. However, he spent most of his time recording in a completely different studio, and to add on top of these costs, he hired other producers for guest production on the album, with some of them charging upwards of $50,000 per beat. Despite all of this investment, not a lot of work came from it. This is mostly because Dilla was also working on a different album for Frank and Dank. In fact, a lot of other crazy shit was going down in Dilla's life at this point. I implore anyone who's remotely interested in the guy to read the book about him. It gives a lot more information than, say, Wikipedia would. But to get back on track, the album was shelved by early 2002 when Dilla left MCA. In 2013, the album was retitled to The Diary, and after some more work was done, it was finally released in 2016. Anyway, what does this lost album by Dilla sound like? According to the Dilla book, he intended the album to be relatively minimal in terms of sampling. He was inspired by Dr. Dre and the Neptunes, who at this point in their careers were pretty light on sampling. The book also marks The Diary being a transitional album where Dilla went from being a full-time producer to a full-on recording artist. A majority of the production was handled by outside producers such as Madlib and Pete Rock, so in reality, the sound of the album is pretty all over the place. But if I had to throw a blanket term for what this album sounds like, it's commercial. It's the most commercial J Dilla has ever been. It's very much a product of its era, with not only the Neptune influence coming around, but I also hear a bit of Timbaland in there. It feels like Dilla went into this album with the intention of scoring a hit, instead of, say, appealing to the underground. The anthem is the first proper song on the record, and it really does sound like a Timbaland beat despite being one of the few songs Dilla himself produced. Not that it diminishes the quality of the song, it's still very enjoyable and catchy. Trucks is another song that's just meant to be fun sounding, the beat is very electronic and bouncy, but it's backed with this annoying ass chorus that makes my ears bleed, but clearly it's meant to be an actual song, since Dilla is actually kinda trying in his verse. If this actually played in the club, I'm shooting the DJ. I think this is the worst song of the album by a country mile. But onto a good track, Gangsta Boogie is a very West Coast-ish sounding beat produced by New York producer High Tech. It's interesting to hear Dilla on this type of production since he does quite well in writing the beat. The Snoop Dogg feature was absolutely included after his death since we got an Obama name drop in his verse. Snoop is definitely phoning his verse in, but hey, at least it sounds alright. Those were the most pop sounding tracks on the album. Then we got some songs that hit a mix of both pop appeal and harder sounds. Diamonds, Give Them What They Want, The Creep, and The X still retain some pop elements in terms of sound, but have a bit more emphasis on rapping. The other half of this album I haven't mentioned yet, scattered throughout the tracklist, are a bit more hardcore, underground sounding hip-hop songs. Fight Club, The Sickness featuring Nas, and the previously released Fuck the Police are the most aggressive songs on the album. Drive Me Wild, So Far, and The Dough round out the album by being a bit more mellow, but not full-on pop. Overall, this is a solid improvement, I say, over his debut. It still sounds like a Dilla project through and through. There are a lot more hits than misses here, and his projects going from this point forward sounded a lot more focused. And that's all the Dilla albums. Was he ever as good on the mic as, say, Q-Tip or MF Doom? You know, other producer-rapper hybrids? The answer is no. In my mind, he was never really aiming to be like them in terms of solo work. Sure, he made some innovations in his sound that sounded very experimental and would go on to inspire a lot of people, but that was just kind of one side of Dilla. On one hand, he's reduced to being the
godfather of lo-fi hip-hop
due to his early 90s work, and on the other hand, he's being hailed as a genius storyteller with Donuts. And with producers, we'll be arguing about his time feel until the death of the universe. But the thing is, I won't even say that deep down he wanted to be like the pimp he rapped about being. The truth really lies within the middle. Like, he was so multifaceted. He can do fun shit and also do the weird experimental stuff that we like to pick apart all the time. And I personally grew frustrated with how he's kind of portrayed in the wider hip-hop community, and by extension, music discourse in general. He's at his strongest as a producer and not an MC. But I think to fully respect the man's legacy, more eyes should be drawn on this side of him. The irony of what I said earlier about not wanting to talk about Dilla's production is not lost on me. He gets carried by his beats, but that's fine. He still makes good music. It's been 20 years since Dilla passed, and I will forever be thankful for his work, inspiring me both in content creation and music, and just putting me on to listening to music more intently. And as much as I dog on lo-fi for being very uncreative and easily AI generated, I wouldn't be here without that initial wave of hip-hop, Dilla, or Nujabes. That's all I got for now, so I'll see you in a few.